Okay, so this section here is going to be on prepping our battery bars, and this first part, let me zoom in here. I'm going to switch views and then show overhead. By the way, if you guys have not seen this before, this is my this is basically my PC, not PC, but my soldering exhaust system, or whatever you want to call it. It's basically a couple PC fans that I modded together and hooked up with a switch, and I modded them so they run off of a wall outlet. And so essentially, like, this is the intake side. So you put this side closest to whatever you're soldering, and then when you go to solder, the smoke that comes up off of this, from the solder and stuff, will get sucked into this and blown away from you instead of coming up in your face like it always seems to do to me. So I'm just going to place that right here next to my helping hands. Switch to the overhead view here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take one of these battery bars and I'm going to stick it one in each side of the helping hands. And basically what we're going to do now is we're just going to tin the ends of the battery bars. Get my soldering iron prepped here. And we don't need a ton of solder for this, because for this very first step at least, because all I'm going to be doing is soldering a couple bars together. So I'm just going to solder. I'm just going to put a little bit of solder on each side. And it doesn't hurt if you get too much solder. If you're combining battery bars like what I'm doing here, ideally you wouldn't, hopefully you won't need to combine them. You just have thick enough bars to begin with. But if you don't and you feel like you want to double up on them like I'm doing, it doesn't take a lot of solder to solder the two of them together. And so now that they cool down pretty quick, so now we're going to take two of them and basically just put them together like this, and then put them back in to the helping hands. And I'm going to get another one for the other side. And again, just putting them together and putting them back in the helping hands. You may need to adjust them a little bit once you get them in the helping hands. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm essentially going to not only melt the solder in between the two, thus soldering the two pieces together, but I'm actually also going to tin the top of this, and I'm actually going to pool a generous amount of solder onto the top of that, because that'll make it stick to the battery easier. Since we can't really since we really don't want to tin the top of the batteries, we need to have as much solder as possible on the tabs. That way when we go to solder them together, they will, it'll have plenty of solder on there already. And the solder will tend to pool around your iron, so you kind of just spread it around a little bit once it once you get a nice big pool on there. You want to make sure you just cover as much of the surface area as you can, so you get a nice blob on the top, just like that. So I'm going to go ahead and prep the rest of these and get them all put together, and then we'll be back to actually put the pack together and put the finishing touches on it. I'll be back in a flash. Alright, welcome back, guys. Okay, so I've got all 18 of my battery bars prepped and ready. And hopefully you guys start out with a thicker one so you don't have to go through all the tedious work that I just went through, doubling them up in thickness. But I've got the 18 that I need to do my 2 battery packs. Now I'm going to switch back to the overhead view so you guys can see here. Here's my battery pack. As you can tell, the glue is primarily dried. It's still a little rubbery when you touch it, but it's dried enough to where these aren't coming apart unless you really pull them, or maybe if you drop them hard enough they may come apart at this point. But they've been sitting for a good hour or two, so it's pretty set up at this point. So here I've got the pack, the stock pack, out of the case. We're going to use this as a guide, so I'm going to leave this sitting right here. And basically what I'm going to do is I'm just going to look on here to see where they've got the battery bars running. I'm going to match the pattern. That way I don't have to sit there and think about, well, okay, this is the first cell and the electricity's got to flow through here to the second cell and get down and up through here in the third cell and over the fourth cell and so on and so forth. We're just going to follow the pattern. It makes it easier. If you don't have a pattern to follow, you probably want to take a piece of paper and map out exactly how you're going to link all of your cells together. Because basically what you're going to want to end up with is you're going to want to end up with a negative lead coming off of here and a positive lead coming off of this battery to mount your positive and negative wires to. So at any rate, we've got a model to follow in this case, so we don't have to sit there and plan that much in terms of that. So what we're going to do, since we have this, like I said, since we have this map to follow, is we're going to just pick one of these. I'm just going to follow this pattern here. We're going to pick one, which I'm going to go with this one first, and which, when you want to make sure, you want to compare the cells, make sure they're the same. We got a positive here in the middle, negative here on the end, so that looks good. And we're going to take I have just a little bit of flux in here, and we're going to take and just give a good coating of flux here to the battery around where the bar is actually going to be soldered. This flux will do a couple different things. One, it actually helps the heat, helps with heat. It'll make it hot faster, because we only want to leave the iron on here for about 3 to 4 seconds if we can help it. And it helps make the solder stick to the top of the cell. I did tin my iron just to help with the heat. I'm going to use these pliers just to hold the battery bar in place. And we're going to go 1, 2, 3, 4. Let go. And the other end of this isn't even hot, so that was good. The bar itself didn't even really heat up that much. Now, just to test to make sure our connection's good, I'm going to pry up on this end of the bar to make sure it sticks to the other side. I don't really want to bend it, I just want to make sure it's good and stuck, which it is. It made a good bond because of the flux. Without that flux, you're not going to get that bond. In fact, depending on the battery surface, you may not get any bond whatsoever. So I'm going to rinse and repeat for the other side. Again, just going to tin my iron just a bit, and I'm going to grab a screwdriver here to hold this down. 1, 2, 3, 4, and let go. Now these two cells here should be joined. So if we want to test this, if we want to test our connection, we can just flip it over, and we can get our, back out a little bit here. We can get our multimeter out. Slide this out of the way. Turn this on, and as you know, these cells are, as you probably know, these cells are 1.2 volts a piece. Now they're not necessarily fully charged, so they could be a little less, but so we're going to be looking somewhere, probably we're going to be hoping for somewhere in the neighborhood of 2 to 2.2 volts for these two cells. And we have 2.3, so they're actually charged. They have a fair amount of charge in them already, and that pretty much tells us that the connection that we just soldered on is good and solid. It's getting a good, it is transferring the electrical current in between it. So now at this point, you don't really have to check every cell. I just wanted to demonstrate that that's how you would test. Like say you get all of them soldered up, and you go to test the two final leads, and you're not getting any voltage, then somewhere along the line one of your solder joints didn't take, or maybe you had a cold solder joint or something like that. But at any rate, so I'm actually just going to finish up soldering. Excuse me. I'm just gonna finish soldering up this pack and actually the other pack, and then I will be back after that to kind of show you the whole wrap up of everything. So stay tuned.